Welcome back everyone to the ultimate guide to Blender 3D rigging and animation, and this is where we left it off. So let's now carry on down our actual arm. And now what we're going to do is we're actually going to extrude it out a little bit. And what we want to do with this next bone is you want to come to the wrist. Now, even if you're rigging hands and things like that, you still want to have a wrist bone. So what I'm going to do, again, I'm going to go into front view. I'm going to pull this out then. I'm going to pull it this time on the Z axis, so E and Z, again, to stop this bone actually rolling. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull it across and pull it first of all in front view to my actual wrist, which is around this point here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into 3, so side view, and then I'm going to pull this now to the actual wrist, as you can see. So now it should be something like that. And then what we're going to do finally is we're going to pull one more bone out to the actual hand. Now the thing is, when you're doing hands like this and you're not actually, let's say he's got no fingers or anything, or he has got fingers but you still want to actually just use one bone in it, you might actually end up with some issues, which we'll cover a little bit later on if we do have those issues where it doesn't actually weight correctly. And this is because obviously we've got a thumb out here, so I recommend when you bring this next bone in, like put it along this finger here, so it's kind of halfway between the thumb and the little finger. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press 1, I'm going to press E and Z, pull it out like so. I'm going to pull it into place, then I'm going to press 3 to go to side view, and I'm going to put it around this finger, something like that. And I think that's actually probably going to work for us and get most of this actually weighted. Alright, so you should end up with something like that. That's looking pretty nice. So now let's come in and actually do our hips. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab around my hip here, which is going to be around here. I'm going to press Shift and right click, bring in my cursor. I'm going to press Shift A and bring in another bone. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this all the way down with a little blue Z gizmo, pull it all the way down, and we're going to go to his knee, so somewhere around there. Then I'm going to go into side view again. I'm going to pull all of this back pretty much into the hip, and then pull this one back into the knee. Basically, when you're placing these bones, wherever you're weighting it, you don't want it to be out here, because what you're going to do is you're going to end up losing some of the weight. So it's going to be really red around here, and as it goes back, it's going to be kind of blue. We want to give Blender a real good accuracy on where we're actually weighting this. So now if I press 1, we can see, probably move it a little bit over, get it right in the center of that kneecap there. All right, so the other thing is, when you've got to think about this as well, is that the kneecap where this is going to be a bright red strip over here, and as it gets further up to each parts of these, it's going to get more green. Well, it's going to be yellow and get more green, and then finally more blue as there's less weight applied to that part of the rig. In other words, you don't want this part of the actual rig, so this on the thigh, bending when the knee does. That's just not natural. So that's what you're trying to avoid. So now let's actually bring this bone down, and what we're going to do is we're going to bring it down to basically the heel and then create the foot. So we're going to press E and Z, bring it down, pull it across a little bit like so. 3 to go into side view. I'm going to pull it back just a little bit like so, and then what I'm going to do now is press E and pull it along this side. So if I press Y, I can pull it along something like that, and then pull it down just to the bottom of his foot. So you should end up pretty much with something like this, with no bones really bent or anything. They're all facing the correct way. So because we've actually been doing it on front view and been using the gizmo properly, it means that this now is pretty much rigged the best we could possibly do it. Now, one thing I'm going to do actually, I'm just going to go over the top, and I just want to pull this out a little bit. So out a little bit like so, just so it's following that foot a little bit better. I'm going to jump into 3 and just make sure I'm happy with where it is. So it's following this line up. Alright, so yeah, I'm happy with that. Alright, so now it's time to actually name our bones. So let's go down the center first. So I'm going to come to the top bone. I'm going to go over to the right hand side where my bones are. And we can also as well press F2. So don't forget that you can either name them over here or press F2. So if you press F2, we'll call this head. And remember, always put on bone after it. And the reason is obviously because if I'm searching for it, I want to be able to see where my bones are through all of this here. It's a lot of parts in here now. So head bone, press the enter button. Okay, and let's click on the next one, and we'll call this neck bone. So neck bone. So let's come to the chest bone now. Chest bone. And then we'll have let's call it stomach. You can call it whatever you want, as long as you'll see in a minute when we do the actual arm bones and the leg bones, they have to be named in a certain way. I think I've spelled stomach. I'm not sure if that's correct. Now, the one you want to name here is this one here, not the downward one. And this one we're going to call hip bone, like so. Now, with the actual arm and leg bones, what we want to do is you first of all want to come to this one. We'll call this the thigh bone. So I'm going to call it thigh bone. But what we want to do on the end of it is put .r because we're frontward facing, and this is the, for us, this is the right side. So it doesn't really matter if you name it .r or .l. It doesn't really matter because what Blender will do is it'll put it over the other side with .l or .r. Obviously the opposite to what you actually put that. So I'm going to have it as thigh bone .r. Then I'm going to come to the shin bone. So I'll call it shin bone .r. And then I'll come to the foot bone, so I'll call it foot bone .r. And then finally we're going to do the right hand side now, so we'll come to the shoulder bone, so shoulder bone .r. And then we'll come to, and make sure you capitalize it as well, because then it'll capitalize on the other side. Then we'll come to the upper arm, so upper arm bone .r. And then we'll come to the lower arm, so lower arm bone .r. And then finally the hand, so hand bone .r, like so. All right, so now we should be able to see that everything is named except this middle bone here. So now what we're going to do is we're going to add in some constraints, and we're going to do this now because then when we actually mirror this over the other side, it means that we can actually mirror these as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down to the bottom bone. I'm going to grab this large one here, as you can see. I'm going to press 3, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to extrude it out along, I think it's the Y, so along the Y axis like so. Now, while we're in side view, what we want to do is we want to actually bring in another bone, and this bone wants to be level with the actual knee. So you can see our knee here. If we come across here, what we want to do is we want to shift, right click, and put a cursor there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to press Shift A, and what that's going to do is bring in another bone. Now I'm going to pull this bone down and have it pointing this way, like so. Doesn't need to be, you know, straight or anything like that. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. And the reason what we're using this for is basically to make sure that this knee lines up perfectly with this pole bone. So in other words, it's always going to be facing that way. If you don't actually put these bones in, when you come to move your leg or something like that, you'll end up with your kneecaps pointing outwards or something, or inwards, and it will just look really, really weird as he walks along. So this actually just makes sure that everything's pointing in the correct way, which means that when you do your walk cycle, it is going to be a lot easier to actually do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab this bone with L, and I'm just going to move it across a little bit like so, making it in line with that knee. Now what we're going to do is we're going to do the same thing for the elbow. So if I press 3 to go into side view, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come behind it this time, over here, something like that, shift right click, and then shift A, and then I'm going to bring in this bone like so, bring it down. Again, it doesn't need to be level or anything like that. I'm just going to make it around about the same size as the other bone like so. All right, so now I'm going to do is I'm going to press Control 3, not 3, Control 1, and then there we go. Now we can go behind it, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to line this up now with my actual elbow like so. And now that means that when he walks along, this will actually, well, his elbow will be pointing at this at all times. Again, so we don't end up with his arms crossing over him or something, or his hands flailing out like that. That's the reason why we're putting these in. It's basically to show that these two connecting bones here always follow this elbow bone. So now what we want to do is actually make a new hand bone. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this bone here. I'm going to press Shift D, and you'll notice when I've actually done that, it will have a line pointing to it because this means that this one's connected as well. I want to right click to drop it back into place. And then all I'm going to do is I'm going to scale this up. So I can't scale it up at the moment, as you can see. So I'm just going to press S and just scale it up just so it's actually a little bit bigger than the actual bone that we already created. It's going to be in exactly the same place. Now, while we've got this bone here, let's come in and name it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call it hand dot right dot and control like so. I didn't put a dot there, so I need to make sure that is dot like so. Now let's come in and name our other control. So you can see it's got shin bone. So let's call it, let's see what our arms, sorry, this hand control. So we'll call it leg dot right dot control, like so. And then we'll also come in and name this. So we'll call this knee all right dot right, like so. And then we'll call this one elbow pole dot right, like so. All right, I'm just going to make sure that they are the same. So elbow pole, knee pole, leg right control, and this hand control. All right, so we're pretty much done now with the actual rig. The only thing left to do now is actually bring in a main control bone, which is going to be basically our root bone. So what we'll do is we'll come and put the cursor in the center. So Shift S, cursor to world origin, Shift A, and we'll bring in another bone. And then I'm just going to pull this back a little bit like so. I'm going to press 3 to go into side view. I'm going to pull it back and then just lift it up just so it's along that line there. And this one, we're going to call it root bone, like so. All right, so now we're, as I said, we're pretty much done with the actual rig. We've got everything in there that we're going to need. We just need to put it onto the left-hand side. So what we'll do then is on the next lesson, we'll start parenting these bones up now before moving them over to the left-hand side. For instance, they all have to be parented up, because if you move the root bone and everything's not parented up, you're going to be moving it and you're going to leave the pole bones behind and things like that. So that's really important. All right, everyone. So I hope you're enjoying this. I hope you learned a lot, and I'll see you on the next one. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.